What's up, y'all? My name is Megan. Welcome back to Glasses and Grills, where sophistication and culture collide. Today, I'm doing part 2 of The Rage of Dragons. We're doing chapters 8 through 16 today and finishing it off, so let's jump right into it. So when we last left Tao, he was in crash out mode, but this video is going to denote the change from crash out to extreme crash out. So Tao is seeing demons everywhere now because of the time that he spent thus far in Isiogo. And as we spoke about in the last video, that's just a side effect of spending too much time there. You start to get this demon vision where you see demons in real life and not just in Isiogo. So at training the next morning, Tao spars with Oyibo, who we know from last video is the boyish faced soldier in the scale. Hadith watches them spar. And after the fact, Hadith goes up to Tao and is like, hey, Oyibo just fought you like you were an enraged Ingoyama. And he's one of our best fighters. Hadith then reveals that Tao has grown to be a better fighter than all of them. And he says that Tao never makes time for anything else. So all Tao does is train at this point. He doesn't really sleep. He doesn't really spend time in the mess hall eating and outside of like necessity. He's just dedicated to his training, as we spoke about in the last video. Tao considers this, and I don't know if I would say he starts to feel a sense of regret for not having done any of this stuff. It's just more so, I have a get back mission and I can't deter from that, you know? And I don't think that at this point, I don't really think anybody knows what has transpired in Tao's life and what makes him so dedicated to his training. They fight their next skirmish, and Oyibo is killed by an Enlovu, even after calling out for the goddess's mercy. And Tao is so upset by this that he attacks the Enlovu soldier who kills Oyibo on the battlefield. And Tao beats the Enlovu up pretty badly, like nearly killing him. But I want to say it was Hadith who stopped him from actually killing the Enlovu soldier. So later on, after the skirmish, Tao meets with Zuri again in Citadel City. And as they're talking, some Enlovu initiates approach and tell Tao to get away from Zuri. Because, I mean, we don't care if y'all knew each other from back home. She's gifted and you're a lesser. Then out of nowhere, Kellen Okar approaches, who we know Tao feels is responsible, well, partly responsible for his dad's death. And he asks Tao for his name. And Tao responds death, and the two begin fighting. And Kellen is getting the best of Tao because though he's trained a lot, he ain't trained hard enough to beat Kellen Okar. Let's be for real. Kellen is a third cycle Enlovu initiate. So not only is he further along in his training than Tao, he also is a noble. Because Kellen is getting the best of Tao, Zuri decides to innervate Kellen to give Tao some breathing room. I don't think she wanted Tao to kill him, but just like escape and not die. Jayed and the rest of the scale run up at that point and kind of break everything up. And because Zuri falls higher in the cast than Kellen, she sort of uses her power to tell Kellen, like, you're not going to press charges. You're just going to let this scale and Tao go. So as Scale Jayed is running out of Citadel City and trying to escape before more Enlovu find them, we switch to Jayed's perspective in the book. And Jayed is pissed, but also nervous because if any other nobles find out about the fight that just happened, they might be harmed or worse. Tao is adamant that he was justified in what just occurred because he feels that Kellen is one of the people partially responsible for the death of his father. And Jayed emphasizes that it was stupidity. Jayed also points out that Kellen clearly didn't remember him from the Enlovu testing. And he also emphasizes that Kellen did everything in his power not to kill Aaron, and that Abasi Odili had to call Dejin Olujimi forward to finish off what Kellen was unable to do. So I think that Jayed is trying to get Tao to realize that Kellen isn't this bloodthirsty villain that Tao thinks he is. He's just a man trying to survive, just like Tao. Tao ain't trying to hear that, of course, because crash out. Jayed also tells Tao that he can train until the time the sun comes up, until it goes down, and he will likely never beat Kellen, simply because Kellen trains just as hard as Tao does, and he's also a noble. So because of all of those advantages, it's unlikely that you're ever going to beat him. So there's no sense in trying, really. Tao is offended by this because he feels like Jayed is contradicting himself. from the first day of training when he was saying that the extent of your success is determined by the extent of the effort that you put in. So if that's true, then why are you now telling me I'll never beat a noble? Simply because of where they fall in the cast. Tao also reminds Jayed at this point that he himself has led a scale of lessers to the Queen's melee, and Jayed is still like, nah. So at this point, Jayed reveals that his father is a greater noble and that he himself is a lesser noble cross. So before Jayed was born, his village was raided by the Hadini, and the greater nobles came to his village's aid. And in the process, his mother was sexually assaulted, which resulted in him being born. Tao is confused because he's always been taught, everybody is taught, that lesser noble crosses are stillborns. They typically don't survive after birth. And Jayed assures him that that is not the case because he himself is a lesser noble cross. Jayed also reveals that the Omehi are losing the war because the Hadini not only outnumber them, but the differences between a well-trained lesser and a Hadini are far too slight. Jayed also tells Tao that his sword brothers, specifically the ones in Jayed 5, so Hadith, Yaw, Chinadu, Timba, and Udwak, are also lesser noble crosses, and that he's been seeking them out ever since he found out that there were more noble lesser crosses than he originally thought. Jayed then tells Tao about his plan to propose a new caste with just lesser noble crosses and create a new training program just for them. Tao is ashamed and shocked because he feels that Jayed's plan to create this new caste and this new training program apart from the ones that already exist, specifically for lesser noble crosses, just perpetuates the idea that noble blood is superior and no lesser will ever be able to best a noble. And he's clearly upset by this to the point where he challenges Jayed to a duel, or like, I guess it would be considered a practice duel. He's not really out to kill Jayed, but I guess just to let out the frustration, he challenges Jayed to meet him on the practice yards in the morning. Now we are back to Tao's POV. During their spar in the practice yards, Jayed also reveals that he has a daughter named Jamila who is gifted, and that he has a lot of shame about that part of his life, being a father, because he wasn't there for Jamila as much as he should have been because he was spending too much time defending the Omehi from the Hadini. And she tested as gifted before he had a chance to come back and build a relationship with her. So the spar is considered a draw, and Tao leaves Jayed kneeling in the dirt. Tao decides at that moment that his limits are not going to be decided by his birth or nature, but by the bounds of his determination and the extent of his efforts. And he plans to show everyone that moving forward. So due to what occurred with the Ndlovu fighter in the previous skirmish, where Oyibo was killed, Tao is not permitted to fight in the next skirmish versus Scale Najir, and the Scale loses. Tao ends up coming down with an extreme fever just from overworking himself and overtraining, and Jayed convinces him to stay in bed. He spends 2 days in bed fighting off that fever. So over the next few days, as Tao is training, it dawns on him that he's running out of time. His training cycle is almost up, and he is frustrated because he can barely beat Kellen as it is, and there's just not enough time for him to achieve his goals in training. So Tao makes the decision to train in Isiogo at night since time moves faster there. And his rationale is that he can get more training time if he trains in Isiogo because time moves so much faster there. Tao has such a sacrificial approach to training. I noticed that loss is like a trigger for him, and it makes him want to sacrifice even more, because when his father passes away, that's what pushes him to even want to kill in the first place, is that his father is killed unjustly, in his opinion. And then in this case, we see him start to train in Isiogo and go even more sacrificial in his training because he felt like Oyibo was wrongfully killed. So it's just so interesting to me how death is sort of like a motivational tool for Tao at this point. So the next morning, Tao is tired, obviously, because he's been fighting demons in Isiogo literally all night. And Chinadu is even up before him, which nobody is ever up before Tao, so it's weird. And as he's gathering his equipment to go out and train more for the day, he sees a demon in the barracks where they sleep. And he starts freaking out And one of his sword brothers is like, hey, you good? And he's like, yeah, I'm good. Lying, clearly. This is when Tao starts to wonder if training in Isiogo is the smartest thing, because if it's gonna keep affecting him like this in real life, then he doesn't know if it's worth it. But of course, Tao ignores these warnings because he is in extreme crash out mode and continues to go to Isiogo every night to train. He also starts to keep track of how many times he is visiting in one night, and then every subsequent day after tries to go one more time than he did the night before. He's already the best fighter in the scale with just his training, but the fact that now he's going to Isiogo, he's getting super cold with it. At this point, Hadith reminds them that if they win the next skirmish, then they will qualify for the Queen's Melee, which hasn't happened for a lesser in 23 cycles. And no Ihashi scale has ever made it to the Queen's Melee, to fight in the Queen's Melee. So they would be the first if they were to qualify for the Queen's Melee. And the Queen's Melee, I should mention, the Queen's Melee is a competitive tournament that involves combatants fighting each other in a series of one-on-one duels. Walking into the next skirmish versus the Enlovu scale, Scale Jayed is the highest ranking in both the Southern and Northern Isikolos. So for both training classes, they are the highest ranking scale. Scale Jayed, of course, no surprise, emerges victorious in the skirmish. Tao is ecstatic at this point, of course, because he knows that now he'll get a chance during the Queen's Melee to fight Scale Osa, which is the scale that Kellen Okar is in. He won't let it go. People keep telling him Kellen is not a villain. Kellen is not this evil, angry villain, but Tao is not trying to hear that. Like, I want Kellen's head. I don't care what y'all said. There are other skirmishes going on at this point, of course, but Jayed decides not to have Scale Jayed go and spectate because he wants more time for them to train. And one of the Akondisi come to get Tao and tells him that he's been summoned to the Umkondisi quarters in the dignitary room. And Akondisi is just like a warrior's most trusted advisor. When Tao arrives to the Umkondisi quarters, Zuri is there. And Zuri goes to slap Tao, and because of the time he's spent in Isiogo, his paranoia causes him to catch Zuri's hand in midair and hold a blade to her neck. Zuri then blasts Tao with innervation to protect herself, and then she realizes that Tao, when he comes out of the innervation, isn't as bewildered as someone would normally be. So she starts to give Tao a side eye, like, I don't know. Zuri tells Tao that she feels abandoned by him because for the last few skirmishes, he hasn't come and visit her in the Citadel City, which is normally their routine after every skirmish. I think the reason why Zuri feels so abandoned is because she counts on Tao to kind of ground her and remind her of what it is she's fighting for, but she worries that since he hasn't been meeting her, she's starting to not be able to tell right from wrong with the stuff that she's learning during her training as a gifted. Zuri tells Tao that she can't stop thinking about him and that she is only allowed 2 trips home. And she used one of them to come and see Tao and tell him that she hates him. So Tao doesn't really know what to say because he doesn't want to lie and say that she means more than his training, because at this point she really doesn't. Tao feels really bad and tells Zuri that she deserves better than him. And Zuri says, well, you don't get to decide that for me. But Tao feels like at this point they're both wed to war. You know, when you become Ihashi, you have to dedicate your life to defending the Omehi people. And when you become a gifted, it's no different. Zuri then kind of like roasts Tao about his appearance, his scruff, and she says that he smells. She then offers to bathe and shave Tao because there are tubs and toiletries and all of that in the Umkondisi quarters. And then Tao is stunned to see an extremely opulent room and bathroom. And Zuri just says that it's one of the many advantages to being gifted, because I've spoken about this before, I think in the previous video, but the gifted, once you test as gifted, it doesn't matter where you fall in the caste, you are automatically higher ranking than everyone except the queen, like the royal family themselves, and the guardian council. So Zuri bathes Tao and then she goes to shave him, but of course he's still tripping because it's a blade close to his neck. He's in paranoia mode because of Isiogo. And he just has to keep his eyes closed to avoid freaking out when she has the blade to his neck shaving him. It gave like the Color Purple. Do y'all remember in Color Purple when Celie was shaving Mister and wanted to kill him? Yeah, that's what it gave, but like in the reverse. Zuri decides to climb into the tub with Tao with her hood still on, still hooded as a gifted. And how can I put this? I gotta keep it real. I know you wanna see. I know you won't be in that TUB, grinding slowly. Tao is like, hey, this is forbidden. But in the book, it's so funny because how like Tao is thinking in his mind is like, I don't want to stop her and I will not stop her, but I have to just tell her that this is forbidden. I guess it like makes him feel better in his mind. Like, I told her it was forbidden. I don't know. Zuri is on her surfboard, graining on that wood, graining on that wood. Even in my mind, the relationship between Tao and Zuri overrides what the cast is. It feels like that to me, so I'm assuming it feels like that to them. Like, we knew each other before all of this. After what happens in the tub, Zuri can't get enough, okay? And she takes Tao back to the bedroom to continue consummating their relationship. Afterwards, Tao reveals to Zuri that he's been going to Isiogo to fight the demons, even though he knows they can't die. And Zuri is obviously very against this because she knows what this can do to Tao mentally and emotionally. Tao reiterates his feelings on the lesser versus noble argument, which is the reason that the nobles stand tall is because the lessers are on their knees. We already accept that we're lower than them in the cast and we allow them to treat us like trash because of it, and no more. Zuri then tells Tao that whatever is happening on Zita isn't a test that they're meant to pass, in her opinion. Zuri tells Tao about another type of gifted in addition to the two that we've already learned about called edifiers. Edifiers are able to send messages to each other across Isiogo that would take days to reach others in the mortal realm. She then reveals to Tao that the strongest of the gifted are made to be entreaters, and they're able to call and control any living creature that can reason. So human, dragon, platypus, capybara, koala bear, if it's around, they can control it if you're an entreater. Most gifted can innervate, most gifted can edify, but the strongest become entreaters. Though they can call any creature, they mostly just call dragons at this point. So this part is kind of key to the story. So I'm gonna try to do my best to explain it. So Zuri essentially tells Tao that entreating is an opening up of souls. So it connects the entreated and the entreater. And it allows the entreater to be half in the mortal realm and half in Isiogo. So just as the entreater can pull power from Isiogo to control a living creature, the living creature could also hold on to the entreater and hold them in Isiogo for as long as they want, even after the entreater has exhausted their ability to hide and be shrouded from the demons. Zuri then reveals that this is why every time a dragon is called, one of the gifted dies. She then reveals that the gifted hold an immature dragon in the Guardian Keep, and its sole purpose is to control the dragons. So how it works is every entreater is taught to mimic the cry of a dragon youngling or baby dragon, which sends the mama dragon running and looking for their missing child. So once the dragon is close enough, it is entreated by a group of gifted and it latches on to the main entreater as well. And since the gifted can't afford to lose their strongest entreaters, entreating is usually done in a group of 6 gifted called a hex. The hex of 6 links souls, and usually at some point during the entreating, one of the 6 in the hex loses their shroud, and because their souls are linked, they all look like one soul to the dragon. So whoever's shroud drops first, they make that person extra bright so that that person is solely attacked by the dragon and killed, and the rest of them can come back to the mortal realm and live. Tao then realizes that Zuri is basically describing what happened to that gifted in the previous video during the raid on Daba, where she called the dragon but then was killed shortly thereafter. And we know that that is considered to be demon death. So Zuri tells Tao that she is very powerful and is set to become an entreater herself when her education is complete. Tao hates this, of course, and he doesn't sleep through the entire night because he's so afraid of that. And the next morning, Tao leaves Zuri and she tells him that she and the rest of the gifted will be in the stands to watch them during the Queen's melee, and that he should be careful because a reckoning is coming for the things that they've done. So now we are at chapter 11, and it begins with Tao days later still weak in the knees because Zuri put it on him, Zuri put it on him, Zuri put it on him. So Hadith and the rest of the scale are going over some strategies for the Queen's melee, which is rapidly approaching. Something that's different about the Queen's melee, well, two things are different. The first thing is that the gifted don't get to fight in the Queen's melee, and the Enlovu, instead of fighting with about a third of their scales, fight with the full scale of 54 men. So as we've previously talked about, the last time any lessers competed in the Queen's melee was 23 cycles ago, and Jayed was that particular scale's Inko Kelly, and they placed 16 out of 16. So while they're training and doing their thing, at that point, the gates of the southern Isikolo open, and in walks Abasi Odili. And Tao immediately grabs his practice swords and starts charging towards Abasi. And all of his sword brothers stop him like, whoa, 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 what's going on? You're angry, you're upset. Let's go to the mess hall and get you something to eat, bruh. Like, let's go grab a Lunchable and get back to it. Tao is reluctant, but goes with them anyway. And this is where he explains everything that happened at the Enlovu testing in the first part of the book, where his father was ultimately killed. He also tells them about his plan to kill Kellen during the Queen's melee and then challenge Abasi Odili to a duel once he is made Ihashi. Hadith then reassures Tao that his plan is kind of stupid because you saw what happened to you when you didn't even kill him. You nearly killed an Enlovu soldier in one of our skirmishes, and they punished you. Even though the Enlovu actually killed somebody right before you tried to kill him, they don't care. They will execute you. Hadith then promises Tao that he will do his best, along with the rest of the scale and his sword brothers, to try to avenge Tao's father's death in the best way possible, in a way that gets all of them out alive. Tao's not really trying to hear it, but Hadith makes him promise on his father that he won't retaliate against Abasi before they can figure out how to handle everything. And Tao agrees. And then he leaves the mess hall, but then decides, yeah, Hadith, that's fine. I agreed not to kill him while he's at the Isikolo, but I'm gonna just follow him tonight and kill him then. No worries. Later that night, Tao finds out that Jayed is also leaving the Isikolo along with Abasi Odili, but chooses to follow anyway. So Udwak does see Tao as he's leaving. They see each other. We see each other. We good. Udwak is just like, all right, I'm not gonna say nothing, but it seemed like he kind of tripping. As Tao is following Abasi, Jayed, and some Enlovu soldiers that are with them, he's almost caught. Right at the moment before he's caught, a Kayed approaches with 3 gifted, 2 Ingoyamas, and the Queen's champion, Abshir Okar. And they all make their way up to the crags, and Tao finds an unseen path to continue following them, but be able to overhear what's being said once they reach the crags. So as Tao is climbing and trying to be stealth, he sees another person trying to be stealth. He realizes that it is a Hadini scout, and there is a Hadini raiding party waiting for Odili and company when they reach the crags. Tao considers warning Jayed because he thinks it's an ambush, but before he can, Abshir announces the presence of their group. And the man in front of the Hadini steps forward and introduces himself as the warlord, Achak. Tao realizes at this point that the visit from the Hadini raiding party was expected. So Champion Abshir Okar tells the warlord Achak that the queen has agreed to his terms. They'll arrange for a drawing down of their forces, and then he states that they will wager peace with Zita. And keep in mind that Zita was originally inhabited by the Hadini, but was taken from them by the Omehi people. So that's why the Hadini have been raiding so heavy, because they feel like they're fighting for what's rightfully theirs. Abshir also adds that the Queen Siora has agreed to share power with the warlord's son, Kana, and sort of merge the Omehi chosen and the Zidin Hadini. Abshir states that if they agree to this peace and peace is secured, then the dragons will leave Zita. And the warlord is like, nah, dragons go first, and then we agree to peace. So the warlord motions for this skinny Hadini man to step forward, as well as his son, Kana, And then Tao realizes that Kana is the same Hadini from the raid at Daba that dragged the gifted out of the abandoned house during the first raid of the book. And that same gifted now steps forward, and she has been tortured. Clearly, she's lost an eye, she's lost a hand, but they've essentially forced this gifted to teach the Hadini her powers. When the Kayet sees the condition of the gifted, she's obviously horrified and wants to attack the warlord, but she thinks better of it. At that point, the skinny Hadini man enrages Kana in front of all of their eyes, and they're all like, okay. So once Kana has been fully enraged, the warlord confirms that the Hadini can touch the spirit world again. They have access to their powers again. So the warlord then asks for another gifted to be traded over to them in order to teach them more magic. And one of the three gifted in Odili's group steps forward and takes her hood off. And Tao doesn't know Jamila, but he recognizes that it's her immediately because she has Jayed's whole face. And Jayed, who obviously did not know about this, is shocked, confused. He feels betrayed. Tao describes the look on Jayed's face as if he looks like he's being strangled. So just to give you an idea of how Jayed is feeling about Jamila being traded over. Jamila then steps up and blasts the warlord's entire group with innervation, and all of them crumble to their knees except the skinny Hadini man who enraged Kana. Even Kana falls to his knees. This infuriates the warlord, obviously, and because of his reaction, Tao can tell that this meeting was not the warlord's idea. He wants to eviscerate and completely wipe out the Omehi. So somebody else has to be working with the warlord to try to further this mission of peace. So we then learn that Achak, the warlord, and Kana are there to negotiate on behalf of the Shol, or the emperor of Zidin. And the Shol and Achak ultimately have different goals. Achak wants to eviscerate and completely wipe out the Omehi, while the Shol wants to wager peace. And this is where we learn that the Shol came up with a plan to arrange a marriage between Queen Siora and the warlord's son, Kana. And the Shol does this for three reasons. For one, it shames the Omehi people by polluting their bloodline because they're now crossing with Zidin people. And it honors the warlord's son by putting him into a position of power and influence, and it usurps the warlord Achak's ability to oppose peace by attaching his son to its success. So Abshir at this point reaffirms that the terms have been accepted and states that the Shol will get his marriage and will turn over the most powerful gifted in exchange in order to teach the Hadini to use their gifts. Jayed tries to stop Jamila from going over to the other side with the Hadini, but Abasi stops him and restates that this is the only way that they can have peace. And he kind of throws it in his face a little bit. So the warlord states that until the deal is done, the attacks, the raids, etc. on the Chosen will not stop. And that the longer the queen delays her decision, the more people will die at her hands. He then says that if he and the Hadini are able to break down the defenses of the queen, then there's no more chance for peace. And if his son is harmed, then there will be no more chance for peace and everything will be called off. The Kayed steps up at that point and also says that the gifted that's in their care is not to be harmed either, and that Jamila will teach them the full extent of her powers. So the Zidin turn and retreat at this point, and Jayed is still tweaking, obviously, because he hasn't seen his daughter in years since he learned that she was gifted, but she's also being used as a pawn in this whole agreement. Abasi then turns to Jayed and basically says that he should be happy because peace is what he's always wanted, and that Jayed never should have doubted his friendship. But he says it with venom and sarcasm dripping from his lips, and this angers Jayed. So he turns on Abasi, grabs the hilt of his sword, and is ready to go to war with him. But Dejan Ulujimi steps up and is like, hey, nah, we ain't doing that. And Jayed thinks better of it. Jayed is then told by Champion Okar that Jamila chose this. She wasn't forced into it. She was offered this opportunity and chose to go along with the Hadini people. Tao is reeling from all this information that he overheard during this meeting. And he turns to leave himself, but then sees the female Hadini scout standing right behind him. As Tao is trying to figure out how he's going to kill this Hadini scout quietly, they don't speak the same language, obviously, so they can't communicate. But she starts to back away from him as a gesture of good faith, and they both back away from each other and leave. So the next morning, Tao returns to the Isikolo and is reflecting on everything that he's learned from the meeting. And he starts to wonder if peace is the best option for the Omehi, because the entire chosen society is built around defense and survival, as about 1 in 6 men join the Omehi military. So under peace, Tao is wondering what the chosen will become. He also mentions that the Zidin don't have a caste system. Everyone is viewed equally. So under peace, would the nobles be subject to the same rules, the same opportunities, consequences, and failures as lessers? So as he's going over this in his head, he runs into Hadith, who questions him about where he's been and catches him up on training updates, and the rest of his sword brothers are there as well. One of Tao's sword brothers, Thimba, then starts to think out loud and just say, well, what are these nobles going to do if one of us places in the top 6 during the melee? Like, what happens? Uduak reminds them at this point that if you place in the top 6 during the melee, you are given a dragon scale weapon, a guardian sword, and you're also automatically made an Ingoyama. Tao then immediately pushes back and says that only greater nobles can be Ingoyamas. What are you talking about? Hadith then assures Tao that that's not the case, as the rules don't say that. Nowhere in the rules does it say you have to be a greater noble to be an Ingoyama. He then tells them a story about a petty noble who was made an Ingoyama, even though he couldn't be enraged because he placed top 6 in one of the melees. Hadith continues to explain by saying that, yes, Ingoyamas are typically selected by the Citadel Umkondisi. And yes, the Citadel Umkondisi usually chooses people who are greater nobles or higher. But they don't have control over who competes in the melee, and they also don't have control over who has the most kills there. So it's very possible for a lesser to be an Ingoyama. Hadith also reiterates that the Ingoyamas are more valuable in the cast than in Lovus, and that they're led by the Queen's champion. So Tao doesn't outwardly react to this information. His reaction is very much like, yeah, Ingoyama, that's cool, and I might go for that, but my ultimate goal is just to avenge my father's death. Like, it's not that he doesn't care about the information Hadith is giving him. It's just that he's trying to focus on one step at a time. Like, we got the melee, now we have to fight in the melee. Like, all that other stuff comes after. So everyone is in attendance at the Queen's melee, most of the chosen people for day 1. The Queen isn't coming to spectate until day 3, and Tao thinks about this bitterly because he also remembers that she will most likely agree to the terms of her peace treaty with her guardian council and give the go-ahead, and she'd do so without raising suspicion because it's not unusual for her to be visiting for the melee. Now, I do want to point out that the melee works a little bit differently than the skirmishes. So the way it works is that each scale starts off fighting with 54 men, but you enter each subsequent battle with the number of men left standing from the previous round. So for example, you start off with 54 men. If you lose 10 men in round 1, then you're entering round 2 with 44 men. If you lost 18 fighters in the second round, then you'd be entering round 3 with 26 men, and so on and so forth. So Scale Jayad's strategy up to this point was to continue to sacrifice Uduak so that he can fight in subsequent rounds. So Uduak could die in round 1 and still fight in round 2 as long as the number of fighters fielded balanced out with the number of fighters lost in the previous round. So seeing Tao in action in the melee is absolutely riveting, I'm sure, for everybody in the audience, specifically the lessers, because of what it means. He's the best fighter and he's beating these in Lovu scales with little to no effort. Tao makes them proud to be lessers. So after fighting a few rounds, the crowd cheers for Tao as he's headed back to the tent to prepare for the next round. He reluctantly salutes the crowd after Hadith kind of like eggs him on, and then he goes into the tent. And Hadith reminds Tao of his importance to the lessers and the fact that he's a beacon of hope for the Omehi people. And then Hadith also takes the time to remind Tao that he is leading 10s across the board in kills. He is number 1 in kills so far. And he's like, well, if you keep this up, you're going to be the first lesser Ingoyama. That's what I know. So in order to prevent the scales from observing each other's tactics and tips and tricks on the battlefield, all of the scales that aren't fighting are sequestered until the day's skirmishes are done. The Proving comes to Scale Jayed's tent and lets them know that tomorrow they'll be fighting Scale Olujape, and the number of men remaining in their scale outnumbers that of Scale Jayed. So this worries Tao because he's ready to fight Scale Osa and kill Kellen Okar. That's his goal in the melee. But he's also worried about their chances of beating Scale Osa if they keep losing men in every skirmish. Jayed approaches Tao and tells him that he could tell him he did well today, but it would fall so far beneath the truth that it would mock it. So he also informs Tao that Hadith has a plan that Jayed approves of for tomorrow's skirmish that would help them not lose any men, but still be able to advance in the melee. And Jayed is basically like, get your mind right, because this plan hinges on you. So keep it up. So the next day, the two scales arrive at the battleground and face each other before the skirmish begins. So as y'all know, Hadith is the Nkokeli, or the leader of Scale Jayed, and Meyambu is the Nkokeli for Scale Ojulape, who they are supposed to be in the skirmish with today. Hadith speaks to Meyambu and basically proposes that instead of losing more men by continuing with the skirmish, they should each pick their best man in their respective scales and have them duel each other. Whoever loses the duel drops out of the melee, and the winning scale goes on to fight Scale Osa in the semifinals of the melee. And Meyambu is confident because he's a greater noble. He's the Nkokeli. He's the strongest fighter, clearly. He turns to the Umkondisi and asks if this is allowed, and the Umkondisi says, as long as y'all agree, it's fine. It's not against the rules. Hadith is such a clever character, and I don't know if I've demonstrated that enough throughout this recap, but I want y'all to know that Hadith is extremely smart, strategic, and really clever. There's a reason why he was made the Nkokeli over Tao. And he uses the crowd to sort of push Meyambu into agreeing to the duel by appealing to his ego. So he's like, hey, won't y'all like to see a duel instead of us losing men? And the crowd cheers. And at that point, it's kind of like, it's up. So Meyambu chooses to fight himself. And of course, Scale Jayed selects Tao. Why would you not select Mr. Two Swords? And of course, Tao eviscerates Meyambu. So the remainder of the scale kneels and forfeits the battle, and Scale Jayed is announced the winner. So this was so clever and such a clutch move by Hadith, because now they get to go into the next skirmish with all of their men. Chapter 13 begins in the midst of Scale Jayed's skirmish with Scale Osa. Finally, the moment is here, and Scale Osa is getting the best of Scale Jayed. Most of their men are down, and the remainder of their men have split into 3 different units. So it's assumed that at this point, Uduak's unit has fallen in the skirmish, and Hadith and the remainder of his unit, including Tao, are trapped in like this. In my mind, it was like a series of buildings, but they were not building, more like just an area that's enclosed, but they're surrounded. Hadith knows they're outnumbered at this point, so his plan is to wait for Yaw's unit, assuming that they're still fighting, and have them help ward off whoever's surrounding wherever they're trapped in. Tao doesn't agree with the plan. I think Tao thought he could jump and spin and just kill every Enlovu that was standing in a circle surrounding him, but unfortunately the world doesn't work like that. Let's be for real. Kellen starts to bait Tao and ask him to finish what they started in Citadel City, and asks him if he's still the coward whose father needs to fight in his place. And this just sends Tao over the edge. And Hadith tries to grab Tao like, no, come back. And but of course, Tao runs outside, reveals their location, and all the Enlovu run in past so of course Tao is not going to let that slide. So he runs out from where they are hiding and gives away their location, number 1. So though he gets to face Kellen, finally, his entire scale is probably about to suffer for it. So now we switch to Kellen's POV. Kellen watches Tao emerge from where he and the others in the scale were hiding and instructs his men to enter there and take care of the rest of the scale. Kellen mentions that Jabari is also fighting in the scale and that he is not the strongest fighter but he allowed Jabari to fight in place of a much better man so that he can mess with Tao's head. And he sees Tao physically react to seeing Jabari run into where he was just hiding. So it works, and it throws Tao off his game. Kellen confirms that he's been hearing of Tao being some superhuman Ihashi warrior, which is like, read. But he didn't connect that it was the same man he had fought in Citadel City until 3 days earlier when Zuri was appointed to be Kellen's gifted, which is like, of course. So upon meeting Zuri, Kellen recalled her face. He recognized her from the girl that innervated him in Citadel City, but he just was trying to play it cool. He didn't want to throw anybody like for a loop. When Kellen goes to greet Zuri to shake her hand, she calls him a murderer and then tells him the entire history of basically everything Tao's told her up to this point about his father's death and how he plans to avenge. And Kellen was super lost because in his mind, I'm just trying to make it. I do anything Abasi Odili tells me to do because that's my duty. That's how I stay alive. That's how I keep my head on straight. I have bigger fish to fry. Like, I'm trying to graduate and be able to take care of my family. So he's not going to remember those small little details and what it would have meant to Tao. But Kellen decides to table the issue and not really worry about it further. But after what happened with the previous scale, where they had the duel and Tao eviscerated that greater noble, Abasi comes to Kellen and is like, yeah, you need to take care of that. And by take care of, he means... Kellen also realizes in that moment that Abasi hasn't made the connection either. He doesn't realize the same kid whose father I had killed is the same kid who's two swords. Abasi Odili is a royal noble, so he doesn't want Tao dead for any other reason than the simple fact that he's a lesser and he's winning everything, and I don't like that. Kellen then talks about how he has every intention of carrying out Abasi Odili's orders simply because he needs Abasi's patronage. His family name is tarnished. His father was executed for not performing well in battle. And so he has smut on his rep. Like, he has dirt on his name. He probably won't be able to take care of his family if he doesn't graduate and become an Ngoyama. And so he needs Abasi Odili's influence and money to continue to be able to train. So at this moment, we kind of learn that his loyalty and his devotion to Abasi Odili isn't out of want, it's out of need. And so you kind of start to see that maybe everybody is right when they're saying Kellen Okar isn't this big bad wolf. So we also learn that Queen Siora and Kellen Okar have known each other since children, and he's always been smitten with her, and he plans on becoming her champion and helping her produce heirs. Because his uncle is the current champion, but he was the previous queen's champion. So Siora's grandmother's champion. And he has to be replaced because she's not going to produce heirs with him. Kellen and Tao are fighting. We're still in Kellen's POV, and they are fighting hard, slicing each other up, like just giving each other all kinds of cuts and scrapes and bruises. So at that point, Ya's unit runs up, and if they would have just waited, they probably would have been in a much better situation. But he sends Yao's unit into where other Enlovu and the rest of Scale Jayed are fighting. Now we're back to Tao's POV. So Tao has just injured Kellen by stabbing him in the hip to the point Kellen drops his sword, and Tao has an opportunity to kill him but hesitates for whatever reason. And at that moment, the rest of Kellen's scale emerges from the buildings or the area where they were enclosed at. And Tao knows at this moment that Hadith and Ya are down, and they've most likely lost the skirmish. Scale Osa, including Jabari, is standing around Tao, has him cornered, and they're ready to face off. But Jayed runs up and surrenders the skirmish. And because he's the Kondisi, his word overrides everything. So Tao is unable to continue fighting without being penalized. And Scale Jayed is eliminated. As Kellen is leaving the battlefield, he does mention to Tao that he's sorry about his father and assures Tao that he really wanted nothing to do with the whole thing. And Tao is not trying to hear that. That's easy for you to say, you advancing in the melee. So tensions are high at the beginning of chapter 14 due to many fights that have ensued between the lessers and the nobles since all of this has gone down. So because of this, Jayed and Anan is Jayed's Akondisi. So he's Jayed's most trusted advisor. The two take Tao to one of the private tents where he won't be seen instead of to the infirmary because they're afraid of retaliation for what happened with Scale Osa. Jayed and Anan leave the tent and let Tao rest. Rest doesn't come to Tao because he is demon haunted. He keeps having demon visions still, like, because in the midst of all this, y'all gotta remember, Tao is still seeing demons. I'm not like really going into super detail about that, but I want that to be clear. He is not okay. So Tao is reflecting on the fact that he had a chance to kill Kellen and didn't. And at that moment, Hadith walks into the tent. Hadith does tell Tao that Udwak survived the skirmish because it was looking bleak. Like, he got beat up really badly and was dragged off of the battlefield. So he's okay. And Hadith also uses this time to check Tao about his decision to go rogue and ultimately lose the skirmish. He sacrificed the skirmish for revenge. Just as they're about to really get into the argument, Zuri runs into the tent and tells Tao that she saw everything and she feels so bad. And Hadith leaves the tent. After Hadith leaves the tent, Zuri tells Tao that she doesn't want there to be any secrets between them and reveals to him that the queen intends to meet with her gifted leadership and the Guardian Council. And Zuri believes that they're planning a massive attack on the Hadini. Tao denies this because he obviously overheard what the actual plans are between the Chosen and the Zidden. And Zuri also tells Tao that she's been called to active duty as Kellen Okar's Enrager. Zuri then reveals everything that we learned in Kellen's POV about them meeting, about her telling him the entire history up to this point. So Tao feels like Zuri betrayed him by telling all this information to Kellen because he feels like she gave Kellen all the tools to defeat him during the skirmish. Tao asks Zuri to leave, and when she refuses, he starts walking out himself, but not before he turns around and lets Zuri know that it's not a massive attack. They're negotiating surrender and peace. And Zuri's kind of like, okay. So Jayed and Tao go off privately. So Tao reveals to Jayed that he followed him into the crags that night, and Tao insists that they can't surrender because they're chosen. And Jayed says that if the war with the Hadini continues, then there aren't going to be any chosen left. Tao says he also feels as though they're giving up more by surrendering than by fighting. And he also points out that Odili claims he wants surrender and peace, but so easily traded away Jayed's daughter in order to do so. And Jayed concedes he can't deny that. Jayed reveals at that point that when he was on the Guardian Council, he tried to convince them that the war was already lost and was dismissed. But Queen Siora and Champion Abshir Okar spoke with him privately and not only agreed with him, but stated that the war with the Zidden isn't the one they should be fighting. So Tao then deduces that Odili had Jayed removed from the Guardian Council, and Jayed confirms it. And he adds that the queen was too new to override anything that Odili said. So she let it ride, but she promised Jayed that she would continue to strive for peace, and that would be the ultimate goal. Jayed believes that life without war could mean a better life for so many people, and Tao pushes back and asks, well, if that's true, then why haven't we been pushing for peace all this time? Why have we been fighting so long? And Jayed is like, the nobles don't want to lose their place, and they don't want to lose their superiority. The nobles would essentially lose. If they fall under the purview of the Zidden, there are no castes, so everybody would be equal, and they don't want that because that doesn't serve them. Hearing this new information and understanding how everything has happened thus far with Jayed, Tao starts to kind of accept surrender or peace rather. Tao agrees not to tell anybody about him and Jayed's conversation. Evan Winter is such a brilliant writer because right at that moment when they're talking about Queen Siora wagering peace, the war horns go off, calling all Omehi to arms. And Jayed confirms that they're being raided before him and Tao run off. The crags are chaos at this point. Everybody's running around like chickens with their heads cut off. And Jayed runs up to the scale and tells them that he doesn't know any more than they do at this point, other than the horns are a call to defend the peninsula from invasion. So he tells them that at this point, you are no longer initiates. You all are full-blooded Ihashi warriors. And I guess y'all graduating early. He also mentions that the only surrender in war is the sweet warmth of death's embrace. So stay vigilant and keep your head on a swivel. So Tao meets up with Hadith and Yaw, and it seems that Hadith is still kind of salty about the fact that Tao wasn't trying to hear what he had to say this morning. So he's kind of speaking around Tao, but like speaking to people around Tao, but not really speaking to Tao. So Hadith mentions that he feels like it's a good thing that they're invading now, which of course Hadith would think that, but it's only because all of the fighters are together because of the melee. So they're able to defend and protect a little easier. So they're in the heat of battle at this point. So Tao finds that timing to be a bit strange considering they were about to wager peace. Oluchi runs up at that point. He is in Kellen's scale and he asks for Scale Jayed's help because Scale Osa was specifically tasked with watching over Prince Solani, who is Queen Siora's brother, and they need all the help they can get. And Jayed doesn't feel like that's a good idea. And Oluchi was insistent. He's just like, well, no, Kellen is enraged as it is and he's losing. So we need help. And when Tao hears that Kellen is enraged, he asks what the enrager looks like. And then he's like, you know what? Forget it. It's probably Zuri. I'm just going to go help. They decide to go with Oluchi and they see Kellen with his back and 20 other Enlovu fighters with their back against a boulder fighting off Hedeni and Zidane warriors. Kellen is enraged at this point, so Tao knows that Zuri has to be somewhere nearby. And he decides to leave his scale, fight his way to the boulder, and find Zuri. So Tao finds Zuri, and he can see the worry in her eyes. Tao tries to convince Kellen to retreat because the battle's already lost. Kellen explains to Tao that he's just trying to hold them off until other people can escape and get away. So at this point, we switch to the POV of Daso Headtaker, who is one of the Hedeni women that is fighting in the battle, and she is from the tribe Tonga. And we're told, just to emphasize how strong this character is and how tough she is, she kills her own father for abusing her mother at a very young age. So she's strong as it is. So imagine this strong of a woman being enraged on top of that. So from her perspective, we learn that Chinadu's head is cut off his body, and another fighter runs up to Daso, who we learn is Jayed. He runs up to the Hedeni woman in anger and just starts sword fighting with her. Daso gets the best of Jayed and gets him down, like she gets a shot in his ribs and is able to get him down to his knees. But he stands up and continues to fight. And by that point, Tao is noticing what's going on between Jayed and Daso, and he starts to make his way over, fighting through the Zidane to make his way over there. Because Daso's enraged, Jayed is able to hold her, but he isn't able to penetrate her force field shield kind of thing that happens when you're enraged. So Daso is able to get Jayed down and stab him in the stomach. And by that point, Tao is a lot closer and the Hedeni woman is able to see him fighting in action, and she is nervous. So Daso also mentions that as Tao is running towards her, she can see the demon in his eyes. But the fact that she can even see that Tao is demon haunted is kind of weird, but also telling. So throughout Daso's POV, it's constantly reiterated that she fears no man, but she makes it clear that Tao is no man. She decides to flee, and then we go back to Tao's POV. So as y'all know, Tao is an extreme Crashout at this point, so he has every intention of chasing Daso off the battlefield and catching her for what she's done to Jayed and Chinadu, but Kellen convinces him otherwise because he doesn't want Jayed to die alone, and Tao, fortunately for Daso, agrees. Tao goes to Jayed and is obviously distraught and thinks he can save Jayed, but Jayed knows that his time is done, so he gives Tao his dragon scale guardian sword, and Jayed is kind of looking over Tao's shoulder, and it appears that he's looking at someone. So Tao looks over his shoulder and is like, all right, let me make sure no Hedeni are coming. And Jayed starts to talk to Jamila before he succumbs to his fate. So this part of the book was really sad, I'm not gonna lie. So at that point, Kellen and Zuri run up and console Tao for a moment before the three of them flee themselves. The three meet up with Udwak, Thimba, Hadith, Ya, and whoever remains from the other fighting scales, all the people who are fleeing. So Zuri asks Tao, so does this mean there's not going to be peace? And Kellen and Hadith are like, peace? So Tao hesitates to share all that he's learned because he fears that Kellen might be in cahoots with Odili and them because his uncle is the champion. But he decides to go ahead and just spill the beans about their plans to wager a peace treaty. And Kellen confirms that just like most of the Omehi, his uncle has kind of disowned him. His uncle didn't even go to his father's funeral. So Kellen really has no allegiance to his uncle outside of them just being related. So Tao continues by emphasizing that it must have been hard for Jayed to argue for peace since he spent his whole life fighting the Zidane and fighting the Hedeni. He also mentions that Jayed has to sacrifice his daughter for peace. So When Zuri hears that Jamila was given to the Zidin, she reveals that Jamila is not just an innovator, but is an entreater. So she's one of the most powerful gifted and can also call dragons. So Tao is like, well, that shouldn't matter because for one, she's blindfolded. Two, she doesn't have a hex to help her with the entreating. And three, the dragons don't know where she is. And then Zuri reminds him that the dragons don't need to know where she is because as an entreater, she can mimic the cry of a dragon youngling and the dragon will come to her. She also reiterates that a hex is not necessarily needed for entreating, especially if Jamila didn't plan on surviving after she entreats the dragon. Tao realizes that this was most likely a coup staged by Odili and the Kayed in order to keep the royal nobles in power. So they pretended to wager peace along with champion Abshir and Queen Siora, but then had Jamila call a dragon to attack the conclave where some of the Hadeni and the Zidin people were and wipe them out completely. So Zuri continues speaking out loud and reiterates what Tao is already thinking, which is this is probably not a first attack. It's a response to what Jamila did with the dragon at the conclave, burning everything to ash. Zuri also states at this point that Jamila is likely dead because she called the dragon on her own and the dragon had no one else to keep in Isiogo but her. And this is when I realized that that's why Jaed saw her when he was passing away, because Jamila is already gone at that point due to her entreating of the dragon. So Tao also realizes that the Kayed and Abasi Odili have planned this attack to happen during the melee because it would be the only time that the Omehi military could be in Citadel City and the Crags without arousing suspicion. So they all look towards Citadel City center, and at the Guardian Keep where the queen is, people are holding torches. So they all decide to find Queen Siora and the champion before Abasi or the Kayed get to her. So in the meantime, Abasi is planning to unseat the queen, and his plan is to kill her and then call a dragon to wipe out the entire invading force. So now once they get to the Guardian Keep, right outside of it, they realize that all of the Enlovu soldiers who are working underneath Abasi Odili, specifically the royal nobles, they're for the coup. And they have no intentions on allowing Kellen to see the queen. Another thing that happens at this point is Jabari decides to go against all of the royal nobles and side with Tao, Kellen, and Zuri. So because they're not able to enter the keep from the entrance, they end up going through the tunnels underground to reach the Guardian Keep where the queen is. There's a lot of fighting that goes on at this point, but Kellen Okar's uncle ends up passing away. Tao and Jabari go one way and Zuri and Kellen go the other. And Tao and Jabari run to intercept Dejin Ulujimi, the Kayed, and Abasi Odili, who are on their way to kill the queen. So Jabari starts to chase after Abasi while Tao works on the Kayed and Dejin Ulujimi. The Kayed decides to enrage Dejin, so not only is he big and strong, but now he's big, strong, and impenetrable. Tao fights him until the Kayed runs out of energy and her shroud drops in Isiogo and she is killed. And once she's killed, Dejin Ulujimi's enraging, it comes down and Tao is able to kill him. He's able to save Jabari at that point, but Abasi Odili escapes. So Jabari and Tao find the queen and her advisor Naya, who is the vizier, like the right hand to the queen. And they are absolutely aghast at the fact that Tao was able to fight an enraged Ngoyama. While this is happening, Zuri ends up freeing the baby dragon in the castle, and she uses it to drive back Abasi's forces. So she ends up running out of energy, and Tao goes to Isiogo. And he also wants to take the demon's attention off of Zuri. So he ends up, if I'm not mistaken, he ends up pulling a little bit of energy from Isiogo in order to do so. Tao gets wounded in Isiogo, and then the queen is able to expel him from Isiogo and save his life. So the dragon is now completely uncontrolled and starts burning everything to ash. It can't tell the difference between enemy and friend. At this point, the dragon has turned on Tao's crew and Scale, and Jabari jumps into the line of fire to save everyone and is burned. Zuri sees this and then sacrifices herself in order to stop the dragon in its tracks. And obviously Tao's entire world shatters. So Abasi and his men get out and the queen agrees to not hurt the warlord's son in exchange for a month, just to get themselves together and to continue fighting. She then goes to Tao and names him her champion. Tao is very resistant to do so because at this point he's lost everybody that he cares about. He's lost presumably Jabari, Zuri, and his father, and Jayed. So he doesn't really have much fight left in him, and that was the whole reason why this started. She convinces him to step into the role. Tao confirms that he will kill Abasi Odili, and that is where the book ends. So that concludes my entire recap of The Rage of Dragons. If you haven't seen part 1 for whatever reason, it is on my page, so go and check that out first. And I will see y'all in my next video.